Hello everybody and welcome to this edition of Jersey Shore Pondscapes videos. Today we are talking about water plants, all the different types of water plants that are available to put into your pond or water garden, okay? So let's start off basically by saying that there are 4 different types of water plants that we can put into our pond. Okay, the most common plants are what's called bog plants or marginal plants. These are plants that are going to sit in pots in shallow water around the shelves, around the perimeter of your pond. Plants like irises, cattails, there's different tropicals like umbrella palms and papyrus and a ton of different plants. Okay, there's so many plants that can go marginal, or bog areas of your pond. The second type of plants are floating plants. Plants like water hyacinths and water lettuce. Then we have oxygenators. Okay, now I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about oxygenators. I'm not a fan. Okay, I don't see any purpose, any reason to have these things in your pond. I think it's more or less just a gimmick, a sales point for a lot of these garden centers. The gimmick with them is that they are oxygenators. You need these plants in your pond to oxygenate your water. Okay, that's the gimmick. So people say, "Oh, yeah, that's important. I need to have oxygen for my fish. I gotta have these plants in the pond." Yeah, well, here's the real truth. Okay, the oxygenators are more like, I want to call them like seaweed kind of plants. Okay, they're leafy greens that grow underwater the pond. Okay, and they're even sold bare root, and you literally can just take, like, they come in a little rubber band with 6, 8, 10 stalks in a little rubber band, and they're maybe this big, and you can just literally take that rubber band and off and take those rocks and just stick them in a little gravel, and they'll grow. All right, they will root into gravel and just grow. They grow crazy. They get big pretty fast. All right, and it just kind of clogs up your water. I think. Right? I'd rather have this space there for the fish to swim around than to fill it all with these underwater plants. Now, here's the real key, all right? They're called oxygenators, okay? Because they're going to release oxygen into the water. Now, every plant that has leaves is an oxygenator. The trees in your front yard are an oxygenator, okay? Irises, flowers, probably even grass are oxygenators, okay? Now this happens through a process called photosynthesis, and it's basically when the plant absorbs sunlight, okay? And there's a chemical process that goes on in the plant, and the byproduct is oxygen, okay? So during the day, plants can absorb carbon dioxide, all right? And this chemical process of photosynthesis then turns it into oxygen that it releases, all right? So, thus, if all plants, with leaves are producing oxygen, okay, we're calling these plants oxygenators for your pond because they are underwater. So, the oxygen that's emitted from the leaves is going to come out underwater, okay? And they're going to oxygenate your pond. But here's the flip side that they're not telling you at the garden centers that are trying to get you to buy oxygenators. All right, that only happens during photosynthesis, when the sun's out. At night, it's the complete opposite. The plants absorb the oxygen and put out carbon dioxide. Okay, so ponds that have a lot of these oxygenating plants in it, especially in the summertime when the water's really warm and oxygen levels, need to be kept up higher, okay? You go out to your pond in the morning and find all the fish gasping for air at the top of the pond. And you're saying, why is that? I have oxygenators in my pond. How could there be no oxygen? Well, because at night now, all those plants just absorbed all that oxygen. Okay? And they're putting out carbon dioxide. And when carbon dioxide mixes with water, it forms carbonic acid. The acid brings down your pH. Okay? So we got a lot of stuff going on here. I'm not going to get too technical. Just be aware that oxygenators are, to me, a gimmick. Okay? They're not necessary in your pond. Your waterfall, your stream bed, your air pump is what's going to produce the oxygen that you need in your pond safely. Okay? I'm not saying these plants are bad, but just within moderation, right? If you want to put some of these plants in your pond, it's okay, but keep in mind that they're going to grow, and they're going to grow, and they're going to grow, and they're going to grow, all right? So always, you know, it sounds funny, but if you buy oxygenators, make sure you're supplementing that oxygenator with a real oxygenator, like a waterfall, okay, or an air pump, okay? So that's the third type of plant. And the fourth type of plant I'm going to say are lilies and lotuses. Okay, so let's go back to our marginal plants, okay, and our bog plants. They're basically the same type of thing. They like wet feet. They're not going to be submerged or buried under deep water. They're going to sit around the ledges of your pond in pots and containers. Or some people have gravel and rock in the pond, and sometimes they want to plant these plants directly right into the pond rather than keeping them in a container. Just keep in mind, if you do that, some of these plants can become very invasive. So planting one cattail here, okay, in the rock and gravel, and maybe, you know, another flower over here, another flower over here, well, in a couple years, that cattail could just overrun everything and be running throughout the entire pond. And the whole pond can be a mat of roots, all right? Keep that in mind. I would prefer you keep the plants in pots so that as they grow, you can cut them back and control them, all right? Yeah, some of these plants are very invasive. They grow like crazy. We've had clients that have put plants in their pond that not only have outgrown the pots that they were in, but they also grew into the rockwork on the side of the pond and just spread through all the rockwork on the side of the pond and even outside of the pond into the ground, and are spreading all over the outside of the pond. Okay? Water mint is a big one. It's beautiful. It smells great. It spreads like wildfire. All right. Water celery is another one I've seen waterfalls disappear. Okay, behind this stuff. Cattails are really invasive. There's a plant called lizard's tail. Lizard's tail is really crazy. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's a bunch of them. They're beautiful plants. They're great to have in your pond, absolutely, but just be able to contain them, all right? Now, another thing that I would really strongly suggest is to, whenever you buy a water plant, to repot it, because a lot of the plants that you purchase come in smaller pots, like a 1 gallon container, a little 2 gallon container. They're small. And the thing is, you know, when you first buy these plants, usually the plants themselves are pretty small. So you have a small little pot and a little plant growing out of it, and okay for now. But as that plant grows, and now it gets 3 feet tall, and it's in this little container, this little pot, well, if the wind blows, over that pot's going to go, the gravel's going to come out into the pond, all the dirt and mud from the pot's going to come out into the pond, okay? So let's put these plants, repot them into nice big containers, maybe 3 or 5 gallon containers, okay? Nice big round pots that's nice and sturdy and nice and stable in the pond, and the plant has room to grow, and when it gets nice and big, it's not just going to blow over in the wind, okay? Now, for potting plants, repotting these plants, what we want to do is just get a nice sized pot. You can use anything. I like to use the black nursery containers. that I get left over after I do like a landscape job or some planting. I usually have containers left. I like using those basically because, one, I have them, and two, they're black, so they blend in with the pond and the liner and everything else. Put a layer of gravel on the bottom to fill up any of the holes down there on the bottom. Sometimes people will put newspaper in as well first, or a little burlap, and then put your gravel in, and then fill it with dirt. Now, you don't need any kind of special aquatic potting soil or anything like that. Topsoil is fine, okay? I go to Home Depot, I buy a bag of topsoil for $2, right? 40-pound bag, whatever it is, $2.49, whatever. You know, pack some dirt in there, put my plant in the middle, pack more dirt all around it, pack it nice and tight, and put a nice layer of gravel on top to hold the dirt in. Now, I'd suggest larger round gravel on the top, not the small little pea gravel, especially if you have koi or larger fish, because they're going to dig that up in 2 seconds and knock it all out and get into the mud and the dirt and dig up the whole plant. So we want to make sure we're putting at least 1 inch, 1.5 inch gravel on top of our pots to hold that dirt in and keep our fish out, okay? Another key for keeping the fish out so they're not digging up your plants is just to keep the top of the pot about 1 inch or so underwater. We don't need to submerge these things a foot deep, right? They're just at the surface, just 1 inch or so under the water surface, just so you don't see the pot coming out and the fish can't get in it, okay? So that's basically, you know, an idea for repotting these plants. Again, the bigger the pot, the larger the plants are going to grow. Once the plant starts growing out of the pot, try to keep them cut and trimmed up and shaped nice so that they stay contained, all right? Now, there's 2 types of plants that we can purchase, okay? Hardy or perennial, tropical, or annual, okay? So we usually, I don't know why in the pond business, for landscaping we either go by perennial or annual, but for the pond stuff we're going by hardy or tropical. I don't know, whatever, it's the same difference, same thing. A perennial or a hardy plant is something that will come back year after year after year. And a tropical or annual is something that will live through 1 season, and then when the frost hits and it gets cold in the winter, they die. All right. Now, there's advantages of different plants in different situations, okay? Annuals, especially I'm going to say tropical water lilies, are incredible. They're just incredible, all right? Not that the hardy water lilies are not. I mean, there's some beautiful hardy water lilies, but the tropical ones are amazing. The amount of growth that you get out of these plants in 1 year is unbelievable, okay? You can start off with a little pot, right? Again, repot them into something bigger and give them nice fertilizer. I'll talk about that in a second. But you start off with a little pot with a little plant with maybe 3-4 leaves on it and maybe a little flower bud or something. And, you know, by the end of the summer, this plant is taking up like a 10 by 10 area with leaves that are 1 foot round and maybe 5-6 flowers coming out the size of your hand. They can be incredible, right? And beautiful flowers. They grow fast. So, yes, they die at the end of the season, but you're getting so much out of that, all right? A perennial plant, just like a hardy plant, just like any perennial in your garden, will get bigger and bigger and bigger each year, but they don't grow tremendously in 1 year, all right? A hardy water lily, to get the size of a average tropical lily, that'll grow in 1 year. A hardy water lily may take 3 to 5 years to get to that size, okay? Now, if you have large koi in your pond, be very careful with putting plants in, okay? That's why, to me, I have a koi pond and I have a water garden, okay? Koi and plants don't always get along very well. The koi, especially the larger they get, become more and more destructive and can really damage and eat and destroy a lot of the pots and plants, digging them up and eating the leaves, ripping them apart. When the koi are laying their eggs, they look to get into those plants to lay their eggs, and they can just destroy the plants, knock them over. It can be a mess. So I kind of see two different things, right? A koi pond is a pond that features koi, and a water garden is a pond that features the plants. Now, we can kind of mix them, okay? You just have to be careful. Make sure you keep your pots up high so the fish don't get in it. You don't want your koi getting into those plants, all right? Water lilies are hit and miss. I have a couple clients that have some large koi, and they have some water lilies growing beautifully, really nice. Maybe not quite as big and as full and lush as they would be if there was no koi picking on them, but they're growing really well, okay? Other clients, I had one client, she was on her house was on the garden tour, and she told me like the week before her tour, Chris, can you please, bring me 4 or 5 tropical water lilies to put in the pond, be beautiful for the garden tour. And and she's got all large koi, and I says, no, I don't think you want to do that. That's definitely not a good idea. Oh yeah, I want them. I want to do it after the garden tour. You can take them out. I don't care. I want to have the lilies in the pond for the tour. So I mean, I tried. I brought her the lilies. Like 2 days later, the pond was a muddy mess. They destroyed those lilies. They were floating on the top. They ate half of them. The leaves were all destroyed. The pond was full of mud because they dug up all the pots. They knocked the pots over. So remember, the lilies got to go down in the water, right? They can't be up above the surface. So they're down in the water, and the fish got in them, and they just tore them to pieces. Now her husband, who loves this pond, was fit to be tied, right? I mean, he was really mad. Not at me, thank God, not at me. But what happened? So now we're 2 days away from the garden tour, 3 days away from the garden tour, whatever. The pond is a muddy mess. So I got to go back there. I had to take all the fish out, put them in big holding tanks, drain the whole pond, clean the whole pond down, wash it all down, get rid of all those empty pots and mud and gravel and all the crap that's in the bottom of the pond, clean the whole thing up, fill it all back up with water, get it all running again, and get all the fish back in there before the tour. Just be careful. Okay? So hardy and perennials, right? Tropical and annual. So again, there's advantages and disadvantages to each. Your hardies are beautiful. There's a wide variety of plants, but they're a little bit slower growing, okay? I mean, they'll grow nice in the season, but they're not going to get tremendous. Tropicals grow one season, man, they bang it up, and then they're dead, okay? Then they'll die, and you have to replace them every year. So that's a rundown, basically, of your bog plants, your marginal plants, repotting, your oxygenators, and we talked a little about hardy and perennial. Your floating plants are typically your water hyacinths and water lettuce. Really easy. They spread like wildfire in the hot summer sun and the warm water. Water hyacinths will get purple flowers on them. The water lettuce does not flower, but it is different looking. They're both pretty cool plants. Usually you buy like 3 or 4, 5 or 6 of them, put them in your pond in June, and by August, September, you're throwing them out. They're spread like crazy. But they're great. They provide cover on the top. They provide shade into the pond, right, which helps to cut down on the sunlight entering your pond, which cuts down on the algae growth. And they grow lush roots underneath the plants that help filter the water and take nutrients out of the water. It's all part of like the food chain thing, right? The larger plants absorb the nutrients out of the water and starve the smaller plants, algae, okay? Again, koi, they love water hyacinths. I have clients that grow water hyacinths in garbage pails, and as they spread and grow in the garbage pails, they take some of them out and throw them in their pond, and their fish just rip them apart and eat them, and they tear up the roots. It's a mess. So just be cautious of koi and water plants, okay? Lastly, we have water lilies and lotuses, okay? So water lilies and lotuses are the gems of your garden, your water garden. They're beautiful, okay? Hardy water lilies, the flowers will sit pretty much on the surface. If the plants are really kind of crowded and there's a ton of leaves coming out from the center, they will hold their flowers up higher. They generally come in shades of red, yellow, pink, white, and maybe like a peach orangey color. They'll come in smaller varieties to larger varieties, okay? And typically they're going to go in pots in the bottom of your pond. Anywhere from, again, depending on the variety, maybe a foot, foot and a half down for smaller varieties to, 3 feet deep for the larger varieties. And if you buy a water lily, and the leaves are, the stems are only about a foot long, and you put them 2 feet down in the bottom of your pond, and so those leaves are a good foot or so underwater, don't worry about it. Give them a day or two, they'll be up on the top. Okay? And they'll grow and spread from there. Lots of different, colors. The leaves can be mottled, like green and brown speckled. They can be solid green, and they can be more reddish, maroonish. Tropical water lilies come in hot, vivid colors. Blues, purples, hot pinks, vibrant yellows. There's even one called, really cool, there's one called green smoke, which is basically looks like a yellowy green to a blue. Really neat flower. They also come in day and night bloomers. Okay, so a day bloomer, the flowers on all lilies, hardy or tropical, close at night. Okay, the flower buds will just close at night. And then in the morning when the sun comes up, the flowers will open again. Okay, so on the tropicals, we're calling them as day bloomers. All right, so during the day in the sunlight, these flowers are open. And once the nighttime comes, the dawn comes, dusk comes, they close up. A typical flower on a water lily, hardy or tropical, doesn't last forever. Maybe 4 or 5 days, it'll drop, maybe a week, it'll drop off and it'll kind of curl up and die and rot away. All right, so it's a good thing to cut these dead flowers off, as well as the leaves. The leaves will yellow off and kind of rot off, and you can cut them and new leaves just keep coming. Tropicals also come in the night bloomers, okay? So their flowers are closed all day, and then at night they open, and they're open all night. And some of these flowers are big and they're beautiful. There's a white one called Missouri, which is huge. It's the size of your hand. Beautiful white flowers at night. There's one, I think it was called a Texas shell. It's a pink. That opens at night. There's red ones that open at night. They're a little harder to find, but they're out there. But they're really neat. I did a pond years ago for a client who worked up in New York City, and he's gone all day. He leaves early in the morning. He comes back. It's probably about 7 o'clock at night by the time he gets home. We did a pond for him, and he loved to just come home, sit on his patio in his chair, read the paper, relax, and his water lilies were starting to bloom at night. So it was pretty cool. All right, now Repotting lilies real fast. Repot lilies. They come in like what's called a tuber or a rhizome, okay? It's a long rootstock. Like, if you repot these into bigger pots, you want to keep the point where the leaves and the stems are growing up out of the soil. So we're going to kind of plant them in on an angle in your pot. Same thing, pot, rock, gravel on the bottom, dirt, soil, right? Put your little rootstock in here, okay? More dirt around it, and then gravel on the top. We're just going to keep the top part of that little tuber rhizome up, out of the soil, out of the dirt, okay? And that's where all your stems are going to grow. And this little rhizome tuber will grow and spread. And as it spreads, it's going to put more and more and more shoots off of it, stems off of it, okay? Keep them fertilized. There's plant fertilizer like this, okay? These are tablets. And depending on, you know, the size of the pot and the plant, okay, we're putting maybe 3 to 4 tablets in like maybe a month. And keep those plants fertilized, and they will keep growing like crazy. Okay, so lotuses, lastly, lotuses are, they're incredible. They're beautiful plants. Again, smaller varieties, larger varieties. They usually are sold in shallow pots, shallow tubs, because their roots don't go deep, they go on the surface. If you plant these lotuses into a pond by taking them out of the pot, they will spread like crazy eventually, okay? It takes them a little while to take root and go, but once they go, they spread like crazy, so keep that in mind. Some of the leaves on these lotus plants can be 2 foot in diameter, okay? The plants can stand 5 to 6 feet high, and the flowers can be 6 to 8 inches in diameter. They're beautiful, big flowers. They usually flower mid-late summer. Lotuses, the leaves are very cool as they, the water is like repels off of them. So you can take a lotus leaf and you can put some water in the middle of the lotus leaf and you can swirl it around. And the water will just bead up and just swirl around the leaf and roll right off. It's really pretty cool. They are expensive plants, and they are a little touchy, temperamental as far as surviving winters and just surviving in general. I remember going to an aquatic nursery one time and seeing like they had like 20 pots of lotuses in this greenhouse. And of the 20 pots, maybe, you know, 8 or 9 of them were nice, beautiful plants growing really well. Maybe 8 or 10 of them were kind of somewhere in between. And then there was, you know, 5 or 6 that were barely growing at all. So they are a little funny, they are a little touchy, and I know some clients who have put them in their ponds. Some clients, they come back each year and do well. Sometimes they come back and they're smaller. Sometimes they don't come back at all. But sometimes they're bigger and beautiful the next year. So it's really kind of tough to tell on those. They are a little bit late to start blooming or sprouting again, I should say, like in the spring. All your plants are going to start to grow in the spring. Your water lilies are going to start to put out new leaves. All your bog plants, your marginal plants are going to be growing and producing flowers and starting to grow again. And your lotuses are going to look like an empty bucket. You know, only till that water really warms up in like June, July, you're going to see these things start to really take off then. But until then, not much is happening in the lotus pot. Also, if you notice, in the center of the flower is the seed pod, right? The yellow part has got all little seeds in it. This flower, believe it or not, is a little bit smaller, but they do get larger, and those seed pods get really big, and they're used for dried flower arrangements. You'll see them commonly with that. So, okay, so I think this pretty much gives you a good roundup of water plants. I'm just going to throw a couple names out here for you to look out for, some plants that I really like. The Tropicana canna. Okay, that's a really cool plant. A lot of cannas can grow in the water, and a lot of them will grow in the water better than they do on land. Purple pickerel rush is pretty cool. Parrot's feather is a neat plant. Stay away from a plant called the chameleon plant. What it is, it's a smaller plant and it's got really pretty leaves actually. It's got like green, variegated white, and kind of like pinkish reddish leaves, but it spreads like crazy, okay? That stuff you really should avoid. There's a plant called water celery that's really invasive, and of course things like mint, all right? And cattails can spread as well. But other plants I like to use are hardy hibiscus. They grow beautifully in the ponds. And I mean, there's just a ton of plants that look great. They grow fast. They give you lots of color. Another one of my favorite, irises. Irises are beautiful in the pond. The pseudochorus is the most common. That's a yellow iris. My favorite is a Japanese variegated iris, and I have a picture of that up here. It's really pretty. It's really striking in the ponds. Okay, so there's a bunch of plants for you. Loosestrife, okay, it's called Lythrum, is another really pretty one. Yeah, I mean, it goes on and on and on, okay? So just go to your garden centers, to your pond shops when you're looking to buy plants. Just read a little bit, ask some questions, find out which ones get really big, which ones stay smaller, you know, and make a good decision for yourself and enjoy, all right? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn a lot more about ponds and waterfalls and water gardens and all that stuff. And check out my website, pondscapesandmore.com, for a lot of pictures and descriptions of ponds I've done in the past. All right, thank you, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.